In this week's look at the Decision Desk HQ 2022 election forecasting model, the prospects for Democrats to maintain their House majority remain bleak, but they get pretty good news in the Senate with 2 of the 3 toss-up races moving their way. I'm Dr. Liberty Vittert, and please join me for a look inside the numbers. Welcome to this week's Decision Desk HQ 2022 election forecasting model, where we're going to be using our proprietary model to forecast the outcome this November of every single seat in the United States of America, obviously, House and Senate race, and also predict which party is going to win the majority in both of them. I'm Dr. Liberty Vittert, Professor of Data Science, so let's dive into this week's model. So on the Senate side, overall, we predict that the Democrats will have a 62% chance at a majority after November's elections, which is definitively up from last week's 54%. So things are looking up for the Democrats. It's still a toss-up overall, but we're getting closer to rating the entire majority as a lean Democrat, which would kick in once they have a 65% chance of winning overall. The best forecast is still for 50 seats for the Republicans and 50 seats for the Democrats, so Vice President Kamala Harris would still be the deciding vote, obviously leaning Democrat. So what caused the jump in the Democratic chances this week? And I think most people would go, oh, well, it's overall generic ballot poll, but really it's key state level race polls is the most explainable factor. So we're down to only 1 toss-up, and that's where we're going to be starting, which is in Pennsylvania. Democratic nominee, Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman, has a 64% chance at winning, and that's up 10% from a 54% chance of flipping the seat for the Democrats last week. He's had a recent run of really good polls, with the DDHQ polling average showing him up by 7.3%, pretty close to the 10%. I think it's interesting to note, though, that not a lot of ground campaigning has been going on by either candidate. Certainly not by Fetterman, who's been mostly off the trail while he recovers from the stroke he suffered just prior to the state's primary in mid-May, so he obviously hasn't been doing on-the-ground campaigning. But Dr. Oz has raised some concerns amongst Republicans, probably the ones giving him money, because he's been spending time on vacation in Ireland and Florida instead of campaigning in Pennsylvania. But I guess you got to take a break when you're raising millions of dollars, although I wouldn't be super happy if I'd given him money. In Georgia, Democrat Raphael Warnock has a 66% chance of victory compared to only 58% chance last week. There were 5 polls in the race that were added to the DDHQ polling average this week, and all but one of them showed Warnock in the lead. So Warnock now holds a 2.2% edge in that measure, helping him overall. So the race is moving from toss-up to leans Democrat, which isn't huge, that 2.2%, but it keeps that needle moving more and more towards Warnock. I think my favorite part about this whole race is that his Republican opponent, Herschel Walker, challenged Warnock to a series of Lincoln-Douglas-style debates, but I really wonder how many people would be interested in that, given that the original format is that the first speaker gets 60 minutes uninterrupted, the second speaker gets 90 minutes straight, and then the first speaker gets a final 30 minutes. So that's a total of 3 hours of speeches. Anyway, on to Nevada, where Democratic Senator Catherine Cortez Masto got some very good news this week in our model. This race was considered a toss-up, and Cortez Masto was seen as one of the more vulnerable Democrats in this cycle. But the race is now rated leans Democrat, but that comes with something of a caveat. So most of the move was based on a very friendly poll, which showed her up by 10 points. And that's the first poll that we've gotten in this race in a while. And so with it being so much in her favor, it obviously had a really large influence, which is something we could almost call an outlier. An outlier in statistics is something that is super different from everything else and pulls the entire average one direction. So in this case, pulls it in her favor. So you always have to take outliers, positive positive or negative with a few grains of salt. It could be indicative of things changing, or it could just be wrong. So right now, she has a 75% chance of winning, up 54%. That's an extra 21% from last week. So just remember, it's not unusual for things to be a bit noisy when there's a sort of a relatively small sample of polls, because those outliers pull things one way or the other. And there could be a good poll for Republican Adam Laxalt this week that swings things back. So it's still early, but expect things to come into much better focus sort of post-Labor Day, when we expect to see a much broader set of polls to measure against. So now let's move over to the House. Things are not looking so great for the Democrats in the House, same as last week. The Decision Desk HQ model still has Republicans with an 88% chance of taking the majority in the next Congress. The best forecast remains 235 seats for the Republicans compared to, quick math, 200 seats for the Democrats. So right now we rate 14 House seats as toss-up seats out of the total. The list is basically the same as last week. The two changes are New York 18 moves to lean Democrat. That's the one that was created with redistricting that Sean Patrick Mahoney skipped over because he thought it was too risky, creating that ripple effect, while Michigan 7 moves from leans Democrat to a toss-up. You'll see this back and forth sometimes as close races are close. So when we translate the quantitative probabilities to qualitative labels, we have to pick a dividing point. Like 65% moves a toss-up to a leans Democrat, or whatever the dividing line is. That number, so 64.9% isn't, but 65.11% is leans. So you have to be able to label things qualitatively, but it means that very slight shifts in the polling or the national generic ballot will have these sort of outside effects on races that hover very close to that line, because just a slight shift can push over the qualitative rating. So as we said, when we launched the model, we have to expect it to move, more so early on than later and closer to the race when there's more data and voters more solidify their choices. But given the fact that some primaries haven't even been won yet, there are a lot of movement. But we think that this is still a very valuable exercise because it shows these variations over time, how the race is shaping up, how it's being shaped by events, and the overall campaign environment, interesting things that happen, Dr. Oz taking a little vacay, whatever it is. So that's going to do it for this week. And if you're enjoying these videos, please give it a like, then subscribe to our channel and sign up for notifications when we post one of these looks at our model or our primary night preview videos.